Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests today are Dave and Kelly. Kelly has spent over a decade in the design arena and specializes in content design strategy. She uses her past experience from teaching and training to help break down complex workflows into user-friendly designs. She's been a designer of websites built in Drupal for 8 years, and one of the best decisions she's made was diving into the Site Builder course. Dave is fascinated by technology and creativity, and as a child, he took apart toys and rebuilt them, and he still does this as an adult. Welcome to the show, guys, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-host is, as a treat for the second week in a row, Stephen Cross, founder and host at Talking Drupal. Welcome back.
How generous calling it a treat. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Nick.
And now to talk about our modular week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a principal solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Before we dive in, Martin, where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from Vienna for DrupalCon Europe.
Yeah, I watched the Dries Note this morning and definitely enjoyed all the demos that you've done and pretty excited. Looking forward to talking about it more when you get back.
Thanks. I mean, I got to be sort of the voice of those demos, but there was a lot of people that put a lot of work into making those come off as seamlessly as they did. So kudos to the larger team that was a big part of what those were able to show.
I, I, I'm always curious when I see these demos. I think I know the answer, but how much demo magic was there, and how much was it like it's part of the RC one?
So, I mean, speaking honestly, I think there was actually a lot less sort of demo magic this year than there was a year ago for Barcelona. So
Awesome.
I think a lot of what you see is really the way those things will work. To some degree, like the engineering of the prompt is obviously going to be really critical to the quality of what AI will return. So for some of those examples, but like there was nothing where I had to sort of like retry it multiple times and then sort of cherry pick the best one. So
Awesome. It's good to hear. So, what do you have for us this week for Module of the Week?
thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to post and manage site-wide alerts on your Drupal website? There's a module for that. It's called Sitewide Alert, and it was created in October of 2019 by Chris Snyder of Phase 2. It has 2.2.1 and 3.0.1 versions available, the latter of which works with Drupal 10.3 and 11. It is actively maintained and has both security and test coverage, and it has 25 open issues, 9 of which are bugs against the 3.x branch, which is all pretty good considering it's officially in use by 4,866 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, with the module installed, you can create site-wide alerts as a new entity type. By default, alerts are displayed at the top of the page site-wide regardless of theme, but there is an option to exclude min pages and an optional submodule, which will render the alerts in a block that you can place in a specific place that might better meet the needs of your particular site. There is also an option to specify that an alert should only be shown on specific pages and can be configured to be shown and hidden at specific times. It's worth mentioning that alerts are dynamically inserted into the pages by front-end code that checks a custom endpoint on a configurable schedule, so new alerts can be displayed without waiting for a new page load. This also means that changes to the alerts won't invalidate the cached versions of your site pages. You can also configure a set of styles, effectively CSS classes, that can be applied to your alerts. Site-wide alerts are also fieldable and themable, so you can have virtually unlimited ability to tailor them to the specific needs of your site. A while back, I made my own module for implementing alerts called Alerts, but it lacks a number of important features available in this module, particularly dynamically loading alerts as they're published or changed. I also thought that site-wide alerts would be interesting to talk about today because one of our guests, Dave Pickett, published his own companion project called USWDS Alert that aligns the display of the alerts with the USWDS design system. So, Dave, thank you for contributing that back to the community. And what can you tell us about your experience using site-wide alerts?
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, wow, this is like the perfect module because it's one of the few things that I could actually talk about. So I thought it was magic, but thank you for being intentional. Yeah, so this is a project that we've been working on at Civic Actions, trying to model, Drupal contrib first. So I believe our fearless leader, Steve Wirt, in terms of the module maintainer, was actually on this very podcast talking about this effort. So we have a number of client websites that we work for that are government websites and that use Sitewide Alert or could use Sitewide Alert. And we wanted a way to make it, very simple for that to adopt the US web design system, kind of style for the front end presentation of those alerts. And so that's been an ongoing internal initiative that would then, also show up on client sites once we've kind of got that. It's still in the works, and of course, always looking for more people to help out and contribute. So
I guess one question I have is it configurable, the dismissal piece? Because a lot of clients require some sort of cookie to set to dismiss it and some kind of logic to kind of invalidate the dismissal if it's a new alert. Does it kind of handle that piece as well, or do you need something else on top
So,
of it?
yeah, at least according to the product page, the answer to both questions is yes. You can optionally configure them to be dismissible, and then there does seem to be a capability where if somebody has dismissed an alert as on the back end, you can sort of refresh that so that people will see those alerts again.
Okay. I'll have to check this out because this is a very common feature request, and I've implemented it 17 different ways over the years. And if there's just an off the shelf way to do it, I mean, the only thing I would have to really dig into, I feel like, aside from the feature set, is kind of the front end piece of it. If it's pulling kind of frequently, that could be, or if there's a bunch of them pulling frequently, that could be kind of a performance issue. But you could probably cache that endpoint a lot easier than you can cache the whole page. So I think it's a clever way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I noticed that you can set the interval at which it will pull. So you could say, I think the default it looks like is 15 seconds, but you could increase that or shorten that depending on the level of urgency you expect your site-wide alerts to have, I suppose.
Yeah, 15 seconds feels very, very often. I mean, the truth, it's one of those, this is something I'd love to solve. This is one of those struggles. When you need those alerts, many times you need them immediately, right? But checking every 15 seconds for every single user on the site for years on end for the two times a year you need that is a huge amount of resources to be using. So I would have to think about that.
I
Um,
think this all depends on the nature of the site and the nature of the alerts
yeah, that's true. Some
on
sites
that
need alerts
dependency,
far more
right?
often.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if that polling is something that you can turn on and off. So if you have an alert, you then turn it on, or is it just these ideas? It's polling all the time, but like Nick mentioned that 2 or 3 times a year. Certainly, you wouldn't want
Yeah,
to be polling if you're using alerts twice a year.
yeah,
Yeah, it's tough. I'm pretty sure it's pull, whereas I feel like what you're describing, Stephen, almost has more of like a push
yeah.
style thing where it's basically saying it's not actively checking. And so you just want to be able to sort of like push it out to them.
Almost needs a webhook or something, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
"Hey, if this thing changes, send this notification out." And but I mean, that doesn't work exactly, but yeah, something to think about.
I mean, I will say I've talked to higher ed institutions who wanted site-wide alerts, and one of the examples that they spoke of was like an active shooter drill, which, you know, a higher ed institution, to your point, may not need alerts very often. I think the other example that they cited was like maybe one of the buildings had lost power, so to let people know to go to other places, which obviously is going to be much less urgent. But you can see where, in that kind of a circumstance, you would definitely want to make sure people had the information as quickly as possible. So.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
absolutely true. Go
I
ahead,
was
Dave.
going to say from a design perspective, this is something we definitely talk about with clients, right? How to use alerts effectively. And one of those considerations is using them only for things that are actually kind of emergency issues. But, if government agency might have locations all around the country in different time zones that when something happens, you need that person to be able to put that alert up, and have it go up without having to do any sort of additional release or anything like that. Because, yeah, an hour is too long. 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, right, is fine. But yeah,
Mhm.
those minutes do really start adding up. And whether that's, a weather event or, a security event, it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can easily, especially if you can configure that, you can also probably pretty easily throw Cloudflare in front of it to help prevent, like, have Cloudflare invalidate. Even if you have Cloudflare invalidate every 30 seconds and you're requesting every 15 seconds, that'll always be cached in Cloudflare except for one hit. So
Hmm.
you're still getting that amount of time. You're still doing the round trip, but the CDN is kind of handling the brunt of that load. So it's definitely something to consider. As always, Martin, you've managed to find a very on topic module of the week. I appreciate your effort. If people wanted to connect or suggest a module of the week, what's the best way for them to do that?
Always happy to have lively discussions about potential candidates or past modules of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can find me as Manclue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
And one last thing, Martin, before I let you go, can you refresh my memory? What kind of bird was that in the Southwestern Ontario Drupal camp promo that people will hear in a second?
So it's actually a common loon in the beginning and it's a Canada goose at the end. So different birds
Uh,
on each end.
okay,
That's what I thought.
interesting. Thank you so much, Martin.
All right.
Enjoy DrupalCon. And here's Martin to tell us about the Southwestern Ontario Drupal camp.
Join us in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada for the first ever Southwestern Ontario Drupal Camp on October 24th. We'll have a full day of informative sessions, free lunch and refreshments, awesome networking opportunities, and more. Thanks to our generous sponsors, admission is free. Registration is now open. Visit swo.drupalcanada.org for more information.
Thanks, Martin. And here's Aaron to talk about the Drupal Camp Scotland, which I've heard good things about.
Drupal Camp Scotland is back for 2025. Join us on Friday, the 7th of November, in the historic city of Edinburgh for a full day of sessions, networking, and an evening social event. For more details and to get your tickets, visit the camp website at camp.drupal.scot.
Thanks, Aaron. All right. Okay. Kelly, maybe we can start with you. If we're as we're diving into our main topic, can you tell us what are the from kind of a designer perspective, what are the biggest pain points or misconceptions for designers looking to design for a Drupal project?
Sure. So, one of the great benefits about Drupal is it's meant to be customizable. You can choose who gets to see what, you can choose which permissions people have, you can match the site to your company or agency brand, which all goes really, really well in the mind of a designer. That's what we're here to do is create and craft those views and how things look and feel and read through your website. But I can't speak for all designers, but for me personally, there are times when Drupal is a little seems a little counterintuitive. Like as an example, if I want to change like the logo or the favicon for my site, I do that under the appearance menu. But if I wanted to change the site name or slogan, I would do that under the configuration menu. And that like breaks my designer brain that they're not in the same location because to me that all seems like the how it impacts the look and feel of the site. So I imagine my designer brain those all being together and configurable in the same place. So that was definitely a learning curve when I very first started out designing, was trying to figure out where all of these different settings and options occurred so that I could design for them.
Interesting. And Dave, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo what Kelly said, Drupal's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness, in that it is infinitely customizable. So, right, in addition to what Kelly mentioned, which is available in core, then you add on contributed modules, you add on custom modules, and when you walk into a site as a designer that's already been around for a few years, it can be really complex to understand how and what part of the overall Drupal configuration is creating the error message that you want to update, for instance. Like sometimes that is in a widget, and sometimes that widget is something you can change, or sometimes it's a widget that is built into the code of the module because they didn't really give you the option to overwrite certain error messages. So it just because the complexity of any individual Drupal iteration, you kind of have to learn. So while there is no one Drupal, there are as many Drupals as there are Drupal websites. I think compared to something like WordPress, where like a lot of the things will be much more standardized across different things. That being said, right, like Drupal obviously is incredibly powerful because of that. But that means you also need to be incredibly powerful as a designer to match that, I would say.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Some of the things you just mentioned in terms of the pain points are on the implementation side of implementing a design. I'm curious to know if you would consider Drupal to be difficult to design for,
Go
and
ahead,
what,
Dave.
and we'll get to why right after that.
Yeah, I guess so. I'll say also I have dealt with Drupal primarily in a decoupled context where thinking about designing for Drupal is designing the editorial experience within Drupal as opposed to designing a front end experience. So for me, I'm usually using, when I'm thinking about designing for Drupal or designing Drupal, I'm thinking about people entering content and how we configure the site to match kind of the content model and content needs. And then front end presentation is a whole other thing. But that's just, again, my Drupal experience, which isn't every Drupal experience.
So for me, it's something, and it sounds simple, but like for in terms of like how out of the box core Drupal under the hood comes, like the help text, I would always, as a designer, put that next to whatever widget, entity, content type it is focused on. And in Drupal, it comes underneath. Like for instance, if you have a text field, the help text comes underneath that text box text field. And so when one of the things that's sort of the learning curve, which is an easy fix, but does present a barrier when you're starting these designs for a front end site for it, is retraining your designer brain to put that help content under, for example, because it makes for a faster handoff and better flow for the designs.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like when we were coming into this show today, I was thinking to myself, because I'm not coming at this from a designer perspective. I'm not one, but I've worked with a number of designers, and I've been trying to think about, have I worked with designers that have never done anything in Drupal before? And I think the answer to that is no. So I'm having trouble like looking at it from their perspective, because I kind of think of the designer's position to be like working with the client, coming up with a design they're happy with, and then implementing. But there's that knowledge in between of, should a designer be presenting something to a client that they know is going to be difficult or not the normal way to do it in Drupal? And I can see how that knowledge would be very helpful to make the project go smoother, to make the client see less friction, to make the project come in on time.
Yeah, and even with, the contributed modules that I've worked with Steve Wirt on, it's reduced that back and forth time already because I I now have that knowledge of how it works as it goes. And, while this in a beautiful designer's world might be a three-step process, it's all would have beautifully designed this three-step process. Now I say, okay, so I know how this is going to work in Drupal. So now I can design for that workflow, and it does speed that up.
So it'd be safe to say that designers that are working or have experience with Drupal aren't coming in with a blank slate for a new website.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I've seen as, new designers join a project and it's their first time working with Drupal. A lot of that initial learning curve is just starting to understand what is up for change and what is kind of baked into a Drupal implementation. And, we always try to, whenever we're doing a design, whether that's a Drupal site or a, non-Drupal application that we're designing, bring engineering into the conversation early and often so that we're making sure we're not proposing anything that is literally impossible or, going to be extremely resource intensive
Yeah.
and, not the best way to do it. So I think that's one of those things where, that was really reinforced that existing best process for us when we were designing Drupal interfaces and still figuring out what we could and could not change was just getting that early and often feedback.
Dave, earlier you mentioned that you were doing design work for the back end, like the administrative side. And I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective. I haven't done a lot of that kind of work. Whatever Drupal has given me, I just use. Unfortunate for my clients, I guess. There hasn't been a lot of attention paid by me in that area. I'm curious as to what kind of things or what kind of pain points you have on the editing side in Drupal and what kinds of things you can do to solve those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to call out a great book, Designing Content Authoring Experiences by Greg Dunlap. I think to the extent that there is an expert on kind of designing the experience for content editors within Drupal, he's done a lot of great talks and presentations and kind of brought that together in a book of so for people who are looking for more resources. When I went to DrupalCon Pittsburgh a couple years ago, I attended every session that seemed like it was somewhat related to this to be like, how are you doing it? How are you doing it? Is there like a way to have a cohesive design system within the admin experience of Drupal so that all the buttons are going to look the same, right? Try to have it at parity with like front end design systems that we're using in our decoupled experience. And basically, what I found it is like that doesn't exist, right? Because the different aspects of the admin experience are controlled so disparately, right? You've got your theme that's doing a lot of the work and heavy lifting, but then individual modules and form display things will have different settings here, and some of those you can control or can't. And then you've got twig things doing something, and that's all if you don't also have some kind of form alter doing JavaScript magic or something. I don't even know what those words mean. I just know that's what our engineers say sometimes. So, I don't think that Drupal is really architected to make it easy to have a cohesive design system, really, on the authoring experience. The front end is obviously geared very differently, but when we're talking really about designing that admin or authoring experience, yeah, it doesn't seem like everything's kind of connected up, and you have to do a lot of sleuthing and investigation.
And from a design perspective, that sleuthing and investigation is happening in code and configuration and multiple places, which I think is part of the pain point, right? So where where did the idea to get site builder certified come from? Was it just a general progression? Like, did it come from you guys? Where did this whole thought process start?
I'll start again. Throw a shout out to the our contrib and Drupal guru, Steve Wirt. I had worked with him on a couple of contrib modules, and Stephen, you and we were talking about this earlier. Is how I found that I spent more time trying to figure out how Drupal worked like out of the box so that I could design for it then that made me realize that, like, that was the biggest blocker that I had, was I didn't understand how it worked out of the box, and so I was trying to, as Dave put, create these beautiful designs that may have either been impossible, and sometimes were, admittedly, or would need a lot of customization for them. So I decided I was gonna take the course to remove that barrier for me as the designer. But in terms of our broader civic actions design team, we actually had an OKR this year as a practice area. One of our OKRs this year as a practice area was that each designer receives a new certification. And given that, at Civic Actions, we build primarily Drupal sites, obtaining this certification was very intentional by our designers who went through the course to kind of establish our stake in the ground and now become those designers who also know Drupal. So that's where it came from for me. Dave, I'll pass it over to you to chat about you.
Yeah, well,
Oh,
I wanna
sorry.
give
Sorry, Dave. But before we do, what is OKR?
Oh, objective and key results. I'm sorry. It's like our goals for the year.
Oh, for like employee evaluation type thing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, Dave. No, no problem. Sorry, Dave. What do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanna give big props to Kelly because she really took the initiative to set up our internal kind of study group, going through this process together as a cohort of designers. I have been wanting to get the site builder certification for, over a year and a half, but I tried to do a internal professional development sprint with some of our engineers who were doing it, and they were moving at a speed that was way too fast for me, especially because the first part of the Acquia course is install a local instance of Drupal, which no, I like I still haven't done that, and so, there were some it was hard to kinda get over that, and also because I wasn't really with people who were speaking my language, I kind of fell off the wagon. For me, the site builder certification, I knew all of the content, right? I had at that point been doing configuration on, client Drupal sites, merging PRs to update configuration, planning out entire content models. I was doing all of the things that a site builder does, but I just didn't have the official thing. So I had kind of learned from the school of hard knocks of how to do all the things in Drupal and even views, which are, a whole thing unto themselves and that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was really, I wanted to, make sure that I hadn't missed anything, that would have been covered in kind of like the course, and then also just get it. But yeah, I had been putting that was on my list for over a year and a half before I actually got it, and that it's really thanks to Kelly kind of setting up this structure where we met on a regular basis and gave ourselves homework and talked about what we were doing.
Uh, Thanks, Dave. And I want to add into that what was one of the things that was really nice and fun about this group is we really ran the full gamut of Drupal knowledge. We had Dave there who is very familiar. We had a designer with us who was relatively new to Civic Actions, but had never actually even worked within a Drupal site.
Right.
So we ran the full gamut of it. And Dave was talking about the homework, and I used to be a teacher, so that's why I was assigning homework. But we really did take the modules and like break them into smaller chunks, and we really did like it started out as sort of individual quests for all of us, but it came together as a group completion at the end. So
And how many designers were there?
we had 7 designers, I think.
And did you all obtain the certification, or a couple of you still working on it, or?
4 of us have taken the exam and passed, and I think other people are waiting to schedule or
Okay.
for, different reasons.
Yeah.
So, Dave, you mentioned the course that you
Ah,
took. What are you referencing there?
yeah, so this is the Acquia Site Builder certification prep course. So it is on Acquia Academy, I guess, right? So this because it's the Acquia certification, and so they have their own course. Some of our designers actually supplemented that course with a course from Drupalize.me or other kind of resources about site building. But most of us, what we followed was that main Acquia site builder certification course since it kind of teaches to the exam. And, that was our main kind of source. But we produced our own study guides afterwards where we filled in things that we had learned elsewhere, to kind of prep ourselves for the exam.
Oh,
And
that's excellent. So you took the course as a group,
Yeah,
yes,
basically,
exactly.
and then also shared your notes and collaborated together to fill in the gaps. Any gap that you had, you shared that with someone else.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah, so it was really a study group, right? Like
Mm,
that, and that's what we named our internal Slack channel, Drupal
okay.
study group. And, it was really different from the approach again that I had experienced when there were some engineers who were doing this and they were doing site building, theming, and other certifications. So they were kind of blazing through site building in a month. We took
oh,
a couple months, right? And, really just like paste it. And if somebody fell behind, that's okay, right? Like this is where we're at and we're going to keep talking. And, people caught up and really trying to have a open collaborative approach that was not a sprint but more of kind of a leisurely
Mm.
stroll down Drupal lane.
So how long ago did this happen? This course? Did you guys take this course and started taking the exams?
we started in April and we were done by the 1st of July. Is that right? Around
Yeah,
there.
that was about when everyone had gotten through the course, and then because I think I took my exam August, or you took yours in August.
I took mine in
Yeah,
August.
so it's been kind of a rolling process, right? Like some of us took the exam on the same day, others took it at different points, but so yeah, it's been kind of a rolling process this year.
So this is a recent, yeah, this is very recent. I'm curious to know, after taking the course, working together as a team, some of you being certified, how has it helped you understand designing for Drupal at this point? Like, what were the results? Or what have the results been so far? Maybe it's too early to really know, but has it helped? Is
I
the
think
question.
for me, it was like one of those last little things like, is there something I'm missing or is this really how everything is? And now I can confidently say, nope, everything that I thought was confusing about Drupal is confusing about Drupal, and it's not, right? There's irreducible complexities in how things are done, and it wasn't like a gap in my knowledge. It was me being correctly confused about, certain aspects that yes, you can have a display of a view and you can also have a view that has a display, and those are totally different things, for instance. And, so I feel really confident now in the fact that I can say what I know about Drupal and understand and point to, and that was really helpful in that respect of just kind of being like, "Yep, I think like I am a site builder and I know as much as a site builder could be reasonably expected to know about Drupal."
I
Well,
will interject and say one thing though, I think part of it too, you said irreducible complexity of Drupal, and I'd like to contend I have some points to contend with that. I think the truth is that Drupal was built by developers, and for a long time, that was their primary focus. And so, for example, Kelly, you mentioned one of the first things you mentioned was that, yeah, you changed the logo in favicon and appearance, and you changed the site name and slogan and site settings. And for me, like, because that's how I learned, it's like, yeah, of course. Like, what do you mean that's confusing? But the second you say that, it's like, that is really stupid that they're in different places. Like,
yeah.
it just absolutely is. The second thing, like what you were mentioning, Dave, like some of the complexities around views or things like that. I think the there's two or three related issues here. One is we don't have enough UX or front end people contributing to core as a whole. Two,
I just
and this
heard
is
Steve Wert's ears and
yes.
light bulb go on.
Two, the barrier to entry to contributing to core is very high, and I think that's directly related to one of the reasons why there's not as many front end designers. Not that you don't put in hard work, because you guys do. I mean, designing a good UX is beyond my skill set, but there's a whole layer of the open source piece of like pushing something up the hill to get it across the board and or across the line. And I think that being open and honest and talking about strategies to resolve that piece of it is lacking in general, never mind just for front end designers and UX. And then finally we're just not defining all these I think some people just like, "This is confusing." You get used to it once you get used to it. Like, a lot of the developers have been developers for a long time. They just get used to doing all these things and don't look for ways to improve it because they're more interested in fixing the code path or fixing a bug or something like that. But having people that advocate for, like, it doesn't have to be this bad. We could do this better, and having the willingness or ability for their company to put time in to push those things across the line and make it better for everybody. Like, for example, one of my first core contributions was taking out was it the date and time? I think it was the date and time question from the installer, which is something that Drupal doesn't use anywhere, but the question was like, every time you install the test site, you have to answer that question, even though it doesn't get used almost anywhere, just because it was part of the form and nobody spent the time to be like, "Hey, does this need to be?" I don't even remember why that question got asked. I think I just noticed an issue, was like, "Hey, this I think I can actually do this." But even just highlighting those types of things, I think is helpful, and then getting a group of designers and UX people that understand Drupal well enough to know maybe some of the why and have some of the willingness to put in the effort to fix them. I think that's something that we desperately need as a community.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
I wanted to get Kelly's thoughts on the impact of doing the group training and then getting certified.
Yeah, so we had, as part of like our study guide and stuff, we also collaborated on the benefits that we saw coming from it. And I'll share a specific story from one of our designers who it made me smile. One of the times he was talking about some work he was doing on a project, and he said, and I just wasn't understanding it. So I went to my local Drupal instance and I put in everything that it was supposed to be, and it worked on my local Drupal instance, and I couldn't figure it out. And I looked at him and I said, I want you to think back to pre-April, when before we started doing this course, to now, and the ease with which you just said. So I went back and installed my local Drupal, or installed a local Drupal site, and I checked in on that. And it's just, it's those things that we say seemingly so easily now, that pre-April we didn't have that knowledge. We didn't have the ability to test and see how it worked first and then start building the designs off of that. I'm actually currently on a project that does not use Drupal, but for me, how it has been beneficial to me is in specifically like with the Drupal contrib modules with that Civic Actions does. And then we've started a new cohort or study group or learning collaboration, whatever you'd like to call it, taking the Drupal theming course on Acquia Academy. So
Okay.
going through there, because we thought I need to give a shout out to Chris Bauer, who was our resident front end engineer when we were going through the Drupal site builder course, who came to all of our weekly check-ins just to answer questions and provide more
Okay.
insight. And we asked him at the end what would be more beneficial for designers as we kind of continued this journey through Drupal. And he was mentioning the theming course. So we just started the theming course on September 17th.
Very cool. By the way, I love that Civic Actions is being so intentional. I mean, obviously, I'm not the first company to do this, but it's good to see a company that's being so intentional about leveling up their employees and giving that back to the community, right? There's a lot of companies that do one or the other. Not everybody
Mhm.
does both, and I think that's helpful for Drupal as a whole.
And to that point, I a shout out to our design director, Jenna, who is very much our champion in doing all of this and supporting all of the designers in that leveling up and earning a new certification, even if it isn't in Drupal, but earning a new certification and making that one of our goals for this year. So
Awesome.
Do you, before you move on, Nick, do you have back end developers in Civic Action as well?
yes.
So I would assume, am I making an assumption? Or I would assume that after taking these courses, you guys have a more common language to speak to back end developers with after getting more into site building. Is that true?
I would say that one, back end is a loaded term
Right.
because there's there's not just a front and back end to most modern web applications. There
Right.
are 2 or 3 layers. So, but, absolutely in terms of people who are working on, right, the Drupal
Hmm.
development and engineering versus if we have a React front end and we have whatever DevOps infrastructure also happening, right? That Drupal layer, whether that's the front end of Drupal or Drupal as the backend data source for a different front end
Yeah.
presentation or all of the things
Right.
intermingled.
That's fair.
That Drupal layer is definitely where we're able to. And I think again, some of the things that we just had to get more comfortable with, like installing a local Drupal instance, or in my case, using the Pantheon online cloud hosting thing to have
Yeah.
like a just standard kind of install I could play with. Spinning up a local environment, right? That is something that developers do constantly, right? Which designers don't often have to do. But, as part of getting into Drupal, you kind of need to
Hmm.
get past that discomfort and then it's like, oh yeah, a local instance. I actually know what that means because I've done it or avoided doing it intentionally.
I love your transparency there, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate, you also, when I was being generous in saying that there was irreducible complexity in Drupal, saying that some of the complexity could be reduced. That is
Yeah.
definitely true. But, I think one thing that, we work with government agencies, and these are places that have their own complexities. And, our goal is
Yeah.
always to reduce that complexity so that, right, we're serving the American people better so they can get the services that, they rely on every single day. That's really core to Civic Action's mission and values. So we're always looking to understand the existing complexity and understand why certain things might be the way they are, even if at first blush they seem counterintuitive, counterproductive, and really understand the existing ecosystem so that then we as designers can look for those opportunities and areas to reduce complexity and improve the experience. So I
Yeah.
think that that is kind of the model that we come to when we go to clients and when we come to different ecosystems like Drupal.
Awesome. And are there any particular pain points that getting the certification had solved, whether it's just knowledge or the ability? Because I imagine before this, you had to go to a developer or another site builder in the team to like answer a question or do something or tell you what's possible. I imagine, were there any particular pain points that come to mind that no longer exist because now you just know how to do it yourself or you know who to at, where to look?
I can't think of any specifically off the top of my head, except to say that the second part of your question is my answer now. That if there were any when I was doing the modules and working within Drupal, I now know at least where to go to look for the answer. And to that end, and Stephen, you mentioned about speaking the same language. I at least now have the language to go to the devs and say, this is what I need. This is how I think it should act. This is where I'm trying to do it. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? Things like that. So it's having that shared knowledge and language now too.
How about you,
I'm
Dave?
gonna yeah, answer your question in a totally different way. So I think one of the key aspects of what I've learned in, my overall journey with Drupal is kind of the real hidden strength of Site Builder as a concept, right? That is not something that exists generally in web development and ecosystems, right? It's a very Drupal specific layer of interaction where it's really about that you understand configuration and have like a vision. And Drupal has a really great admin interface where these are all like checkboxes or, fields you can type in. Like you can do things that in other content management systems or frameworks would absolutely have to be done at the code layer. But that admin, UI in Drupal really empowers people who are able to have enough technical understanding to like navigate it to really, customize sites and make some of those changes themselves without needing to understand the underlying code, even if the configuration also exists as a code layer, right? That UI is a really big benefit, and the fact that it exists and
Yeah.
that framework, like there's so much you can understand about why a given Drupal instance that you're in is working the way it is,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
what you can change within that layer that I think again is one of Drupal's really great strengths that I don't think a lot of people really understand or tout as much as we could.
I I have a follow-up question for that then, I guess, and maybe it sounds like you're still working in Drupal, Dave, so maybe this is more for Kelly, but you mentioned you're not designing in Drupal right now. Now that you have a better understanding of how Drupal works, are there pieces of Drupal that you miss in the other, like, every system has its strengths. Are there pieces of Drupal that you're like, "Man, I just wish I had, I don't know, a forum display so I could tweak this or XYZ?"
Well, so even though I'm not on a project that's using Drupal, I am still, mostly because I'm not on a project that's using Drupal. In my personal life, I am still I'm building a website for my husband for his business in Drupal so that I can keep up my practices and keep up my learning and my knowledge. And I think the ease of which Layout Builder has made that easier for me. And specifically, like Dave, you were talking about how that UI helps create it. It also like inherently teaches some UX principles in it. For instance, like site and information architecture and what do you want to be a page? What do you want to be a view? What do you want to be a menu link? Where how are you going to lay out your site so that people can easily maneuver through it? I think that's the a big benefit of it and something that if I were working within other content management systems or website creation would be missing for me.
Fair enough.
I'm curious to know what the gap was between your knowledge of Drupal before going down this site building course and certification. What was the gap? Not just necessarily for yourselves, but also for the team, the 7 people at large. Like, how big was that gap? And what are the main things that filled in for you through taking that course?
Yeah, in my previous position, we built our help website in Drupal. And so as a content designer, one of our functions was to create help documentation. So all of that was built and edited within the Drupal interface as content editors. But we never had access to any of the configuration portions of it. So I was what what I thought was confident and comfortable building within Drupal turns out was not what it was. But now having taken the course, I see the difference in what's possible to do as a content editor versus who gives those permissions to the content editors and sets those up. So I would say I was
Mm,
probably, if we're one very limited knowledge to five Dave Pickett knowledge, I was probably a two, maybe two and a half when I came in. We did have designers who I feel would rate themselves at maybe half or one when they entered. And then, we had Dave, our rock star, who had already been doing it, but just hadn't gotten through it. But I don't want to talk for you, Dave, so go ahead.
No, please. I'll take Dave Pickett as the high end of the scale. No additional comment needed.
On a scale from 0 to Dave,
Yeah.
You know,
uh,
I actually had to create a custom emoji, which is Dave the Drupal fairy, and it's me as like a little fairy with the Drupal logo as the wings, because that was how people felt whenever, an issue would come up and I'd be like, "Oh, blah, 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 blah." And they'd be like, "Wait, you just fixed that? Like, what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, that's just configuration. Like, it's one line, it's a one word PR change from true to false in one place." And just knowing how to do that, right? Like, it's not actually that hard, and it's really not worth engineering time,
Mhm.
you know, when they could be doing something with actual, like, code and
Good.
architecture, right? Like, versus we're changing something from true to false because we want to show or not show something in the admin interface. Like, that is like being able to actually implement my design, right? Like, in
Yeah.
these very small things, like, it's great. Then it reduces the need for back and forth. And, I'll still have a engineer review my PRs, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that. So that again is like the level at which I was operating before that course, but it was really great to go through it with people. We had one who had done a lot of designing in Drupal, and again had kind of had the school of hard knocks. And she was like, "I wish I had taken this like when I started at Civic Actions or started on any project with Drupal. Like, it's a great introductory course to the basics of Drupal, right? If you go through that Acquia site building course, it gets you to add content to the site, right? Again, what Kelly talked about is like level one, and it gets you to configure a content type or two, right? Kind of that level two stuff. Like, it gets you a lot of really basic concepts. And even if you wouldn't remember, like, oh, that's how I did that, like, just the fact that it's possible within Drupal, and that's like the
Mhm.
levels that you can kind of ascend, is really, I
Yeah.
think, valuable for setting the context of the whole ecosystem.
I'm curious, and maybe you guys don't have the answer for this, but when you were choosing a course to take, do you know what drove you to the Acquia course, or were there other courses available that you were considering? You may not know the answer to that.
Well, for me, it was I had taken the same ProDev, well, tried to take the same ProDev sprint earlier with the engineers that Dave had taken, and that was the course that they had chosen to go through. So that was kind of just my knowledge base of what was out there and what to go with first. So
Okay.
no specific reason other than that's what I already thought I knew.
Okay.
So I actually want to flip this around because it sounds like this certification was pretty beneficial for you guys for a couple of reasons. But one of the recurring themes is that it's helped with communication, right? Knowing what piece to talk about or who to ask for a particular thing has helped kind of these handoff situations. I'm curious about I'm a developer. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or ideas on resources or courses that a developer could take to kind of do the same thing for a designer. Like, is there a design course I could take to be like, hey, here's the A to Z high level overview of what design is, so that I'm not asking you know, quote unquote questions that I should just have a foundation in and know the language to use when talking to designers. Because it's a two-way communication is a two-way street, right? So if developers can improve too, do you have any I don't think there's an Acquia certification for design, but
Nick, I thought
it,
developers knew everything.
Yeah, well, I would say, I really always like, I've personally, the way I learn is, in context first, rather like from high level concepts. So for me, right, like, I learned Drupal because I had to, because it was and I had a really great, again, developer I was working with, Steve Wirt, also Christian Burke, Jay Darnell, lots of wonderful Drupal developers I got to work with on a regular basis who were very, willing to help me understand. And, I think to the extent that communication is a two-way street, right? I would help them understand, what I was thinking about from the design perspective. So start by talking to your local designer on your project and understanding their specific pain points. And, I think use that as a jumping off point for particularly like if there's a design tool or framework that they're using, why are they using that? What are the benefits? How can you interact with that or understand that? And then build from there.
And I would echo that and take it even maybe one step farther in that work with your local designer to kind of build your own Drupal design system so that when as new designers come in or as new engineers come in, they can pull from that design system that you've already worked on together and with that same both points of view in same language and help create it that way also. There's so many just like with site builder certifications, there's so many different courses that you could take. There's so many different ways and paths that you could take and even individual specialties of product or visual design, graphic design. There's so many out there that what Dave said is probably the easiest way is just find a designer buddy and buddy up.
Sounds good. We're coming up towards the end of the show, so I'm gonna try to speed up a little bit. But I'm curious about the. We've talked a lot about how you prepared, right? You kind of did study groups, you took that ARCA course, but let's talk a little bit closer to the actual test and preparing. Were there? How did you kind of prepare for the day of test? Did you do some last minute cramming? Did you review something like? How did you prepare to take the actual test? What was that like?
Well, first we made Dave take it first, so he could so he could tell us what it was like. But for me, and Dave, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut in front of you, but for me, based off his recommendations, I went back through our study guide a lot, the questions that we had raised in Slack. I also rewatched the entire course in the videos. I didn't do it, but I just rewatched all the videos and then very admittedly I memorized the 20 question study guide question that's on the Acquia site builder site because I thought that would help at least, again, help me speak the same language even if they weren't the same questions
No.
on there.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that I didn't really fully understand until like I was getting ready to take the test is how intense the remote proctoring is, right? You need to clear your desk and then be ready to show the whole room that you're sitting in. So I had to clean with part of my preparation, right? So, I think yeah, I reviewed the materials, but a lot of it was just even this, I haven't taken a test like in my life in a long time and technology has changed and I think I did my SATs online in 2002 or on a computer, right? And that was one thing. This is a totally different experience. So even part of it was just understanding the technology setup of the online proctoring thing and like I then left a ton of notes about like, okay, you're going to need to use this special browser and make sure you log into both of these different websites ahead of time. Otherwise, you're going to have to be pulling up your phone, which you're not supposed to even have in the room with you to get your password and type it in again, right? Like just little things like that.
Yeah.
That was more, I think, where a lot of my oh, I wish I had prepared for these kind of aspects came in as opposed to the material.
Dare I ask, did you pass the test?
I did. We
We
did.
Okay. So as we wrap up today, do you have any final advice for designers or organizations thinking about taking this approach that you've taken? Start with Dave.
Find a buddy, right? I think it's easier to do this when you have somebody who's going through it with you so that you can bounce questions off of each other and, somebody who's kind of coming at it from the same perspective you are can be helpful. So you feel like you're in it with somebody else and just say, "Hey, I want to do this. Would you be willing to do it with me?" Easier to do it together than try and doing it by your lonesome.
Yeah, I would also add break it down. Take it in small chunks. Drupal can be very, very overwhelming, particularly if you have little experience in it. So, instead of looking at the course and all of the modules, kind of follow our model, I guess, of, maybe a module. Sometimes we even did just half a module a week. Take it, break it down into small chunks, make it seem more manageable. It's the agile and scrum sprint idea of, make it smaller chunks easily more deliverable on shorter time frames. And you put enough small pieces together and you got a whole beach full of rocks. So,
Awesome. Well, Dave and Kelly, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your patience with a couple of technical difficulties today.
well, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Do you have any questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal, or you can email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can also connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the hashtag Talking Drupal channel.
If you want to be a guest on Talking Drupal or our new show, TD Cafe, click on the guest request button in the sidebar of talkingdrupal.com.
If you'd like to promote your Drupal community event like the two we did today, you can get that started by going to talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest host, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron by going to talkingdrupal.com and smashing that Become a Patron button.
All right, Dave, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I guess LinkedIn? I don't know. I'm not really on social media or, dave.pickett@civicactions.com. Or I guess
Perfect.
I'm on the Drupal Slack too. Yeah.
Perfect. And
I'll
Kelly, how
put it in
about
the
you?
show notes. You got it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kelly.smith@civicactions.com, Ke Smith on Drupal.org, and Kelly S on the Drupal Slack.
Perfect. And Stephen, how about you?
Stephen Cross with a PH.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys next week.